The main finding really is that, on average, governance improved over the last decade, but that improvement almost stopped over the last 3 years. The development has been driven largely by the improvement in areas of human development, education, health, etc., and the economy, or what you call the economic opportunities, infrastructure, etc. But unfortunately, in the area of security, rule of law, and the area of rights and participation, inclusion, all this have been deteriorating, and that really is a matter of concern. Yes, definitely COVID had some impact on this deterioration. We could see, for example, it has exposed the weakness of our health systems, especially lack of resources, human resources there. We had problem with in education, in distance learning, because we don't have much of internet capabilities or devices for the kids. So no doubt COVID played its role, but we cannot blame COVID for all the problem we're having. Well, it's not all gloomy. We have some good news. 88% of our population now really enjoy better level of economic opportunity than 10 years ago. So the economic fronts, few things moved forward. That was driven mainly by the development in infrastructure. That is consistent. For example, digital communication was the main driver really in that category. It improved for all 54 countries over the decade, which is really wonderful. But meanwhile, we need also to note that when it comes to power, 600 million Africans still don't have access to reliable electricity. This is a major problem because without electricity, you cannot have business, you cannot have jobs, you cannot have education, you cannot have health services. Is a major problem, is still there. So although there's some development there in the economic front, still there are areas which we need to work on. One bright spot actually is that of gender, women equality. This has been improving really across Africa. 42 countries have improved consistently over the last 10 years in that area. This is wonderful. We also note an improvement on the national statistical offices and capacity. This has always been a problem in Africa. We have been campaigning this for so many years. Without data, we cannot really manage our countries. It is very important to collect appropriate data because that tells us what we need to do. So there's some improvement there. We hope for more improvement in that area. The problem is that development people, the national agencies or whoever, always like to take their photographs carrying babies outside the clinic. But that works well with the media, but to stand by a bland office of national statistics, I mean, it's not that sexy. That's a problem. But to tell people without the data, you cannot really develop health in an efficient manner. Well, I have a number of concerns. To start with, number one, security. Security situation is deteriorating in Africa, and that's something we need to pay attention to. For a long time, we have been talking about an African standing force. That's what we need really to do, an African solution to terrorism, instead of contracting with Wagner groups and other mercenaries. That's something we need to focus on as a continent because it is a problem for us. We have certain serious issues with climate change. The 10 most affected countries by climate change are all Africans. Our resilience here is very low. We need to pay attention to that effect on us. No doubt, the double whammy of COVID, Ukraine war, etc., really poses a lot of challenges for our people. And what we also find is the fiscal space for African countries is really closing. We always ask, why African countries regularly fall into this debt trap and cannot move forward. And if you look at the numbers, actually, when African countries' debt reach 40%, alarm bells start ringing. When the average debt to GDP ratio in G7 countries is like 136% of the GDP. And that raises a question, why is that? And the answer really is the premium African countries have to pay for debt. We pay over 10% points higher than the rich countries, and that is a recipe for disaster. We need some reforms really in the financial systems to enable African countries to borrow at a reasonable rate and then use that for development. That is one issue which really concerns us, and we need some reform in that area. Finally, I'm also concerned about the closing space for the African civil society. This has been continuously happening over the last 10 years. This is really not acceptable, and we need to deal with that issue as well. The stagnation in the development of governance in Africa is worrying. If that continues, how can we hope to meet the SDG targets by 2030? We are halfway toward that now, and it doesn't look good. We really have to be careful about how we're going to move forward if we are really going to meet these targets. At the moment, I'm skeptic about that. While we have seen development in the area of health, education, human development, while we have seen development in the area of economic opportunity in Africa, at the same time we see backsliding in the area of participation, rights, and security and safety for our people. Let's be clear about this. There can be no trade-off between different components of governance. Without real data, without good data, how can we develop national policies? You cannot drive a car without some data in front of you. You cannot fly a plane without data. How could you run a country without reliable data? How can you develop policies?